Sage of the Shadows, where dark whispers echo through the night.
Audio story, Blood Twins. Chapter 11, The Weight of Silence. Arina pushed open the wooden door to her home, the creak loud in the stillness of the night. The lock clicked into place behind her, its sound sharp, but it did nothing to make her feel safer. The house was quiet, far too quiet. It was a home tucked away at the edge of the district. 1 story, 3 rooms, a small kitchen, and a basement that smelled faintly of damp stone. Practical, but devoid of life. Shadows pooled in the corners as the dim light overhead flickered and buzzed. It felt more like a waiting room for ghosts than a place to live. Her steps were slow as she moved further inside. The table by the wall was cluttered with papers and empty glasses, a testament to her nights spent chasing answers and drowning the pain. Arina's fingers brushed over the edge of the table as she passed, her blue eyes glancing over the scattered mess. She dropped her bag onto a chair and stood still for a long moment, her hand pressed against the table for support. It felt like the walls were closing in, suffocating her with their cold indifference. Her jaw tightened as she straightened and made her way to the bathroom. The shower was a small, cramped space, but the water that sputtered from the rusting faucet was hot enough to sting. She scrubbed herself clean, watching the dirt and blood swirl down the drain. The sensation was mechanical, numbing. When she stepped out, the foggy mirror reflected a stranger. Dark shadows circled her blue eyes, and her damp hair clung to her pale face. Her fingers gripped the edge of the sink as she stared at herself, her expression cold. She dressed in clean clothes, a gray sweater and black jeans, before returning to the living room. The documents she had taken lay waiting on the table. Their presence was oppressive, the weight of what they might reveal pressing heavily on her mind. Her hands shook slightly as she unfolded the first page. Her eyes moved over the words, and a familiar nausea churned in her stomach. Subjects are showing signs of increased aggression. Pain thresholds heightened under stress conditions. Experimentation to continue. The words blurred as her vision turned misty. The sterile language couldn't mask the horrors it described. Her grip tightened on the paper until it crumpled slightly. Her memories surged forth like a tidal wave. Bright lights, straps cutting into her wrists, the sharp sting of needles. Pain so intense it left her gasping for air. Hunger that twisted her insides and consumed her every thought. Her breathing grew uneven as she forced herself to stop. She couldn't afford to spiral now. There was still work to do. She picked up a marker, crossing out the warehouse at the docks and scribbling in new details. What kind of shipment? Warehouse led to training ground. Her gaze drifted to a worn photo tucked into the corner of the board. It was of her and her brother. Their matching blue eyes sparkled with life, and his grin was so full of confidence it hurt to look at. Her hand trembled as she reached out to touch the photo. "You're stronger than me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "So why aren't you here?" The loneliness pressed on her chest like a weight. She thought of Togi's family, the warmth and chaos of their arguments, the way they defended each other despite their differences. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Arina had nothing but shadows and silence. She felt jealous of Togi's connection to his family, yet happy for him at the same time. It was a cruel paradox, one that left her feeling even more emptiness. She poured herself a drink, the amber liquid burning her throat as she swallowed. The photo of her brother blurred as tears welled in her eyes. She turned away abruptly, her hand tightening around the glass as she tried to silence the ache in her chest. The week passed in a haze. Arina buried herself in her work, but the nights were the worst. Her dreams were plagued by nightmares, memories of the hunger and the pain. One night, she woke gasping for air, her skin slick with sweat. The empty bottle on the table mocked her, a cruel reminder of her spiraling state. She needed more. Ignoring the warning bells in her mind, she dressed and left the house, her boots crunching against the gravel as she walked into the night. Her hands clenched into fists as she tried to keep her frustration in check. The bar was crowded and dimly lit, the smell of alcohol and sweat filling the air. Arina moved to the bar and ordered drink after drink. Each glass dulled the edges of her anger, but it never fully disappeared. The world felt hazy, and her control was slipping away. If she stays longer, people might get hurt. The cool night air was biting as Arina stumbled out of the bar, the buzz of alcohol dulling her senses. The street lights cast long, eerie shadows across the deserted street, and her breath formed faint clouds as she exhaled. Her mind churned with frustration and anger, each step echoing her helplessness. She pulled her cloak tighter around her, her blue eyes scanning the street. A chill ran down her spine, though it wasn't from the cold. She was being watched. Arina slowed her pace, her hand instinctively drifting toward the dagger concealed at her waist. The sound of a footstep, a deliberate misstep, crunched against the gravel behind her. 4 figures emerged from the shadows. The 5th stood back, his crossbow trained on her. The glint of silver-tipped bolts made her lip curl. "Evening, Leech," one of them sneered, his face hidden beneath a hood. "Out for a midnight snack?" Her fingers tightened around the hilt of her dagger. "You picked the wrong night to test me." The hunter with the crossbow smirked. "Let's check that theory, shall we?" He fired. Arina moved instinctively, dodging the bolt by inches. It whizzed past her ear and buried itself in a nearby wall. Another hunter lunged, wielding a short sword, but she met him with a feral growl. Her dagger flashed as she deflected his blade, twisting her body and slashing across his arm. Pain flared as another bolt grazed her shoulder, tearing through her clothes. She stumbled but caught herself, her eyes glowing like embers. The hunters pressed their attack. One came at her with a silver chain, trying to loop it around her neck. She ducked under his swing, kicking his knee out from under him and stabbing her dagger into his side. He screamed as she wrenched the blade free, the silver chain falling uselessly to the ground. The crossbowman reloaded quickly, aiming for her chest. Arina threw her dagger, the blade embedding itself in his forearm. He screamed, dropping the weapon, and she closed the distance between them in seconds. Her fist collided with his jaw, sending him sprawling. But she wasn't fast enough to dodge the next attack. A wooden dart pierced her arm, and she hissed in pain as the wood burned against her flesh. The hunter who fired it grinned, thinking he'd gained the upper hand. Fueled by rage and desperation, Arina tore the dart from her arm and lunged at him. Her movements were erratic, drunken but dangerous. She slammed him against the wall, her nails digging into his chest. She was a cornered animal, feral and unrelenting. The remaining hunters hesitated, their confidence wavering. Arina's crimson eyes glowed brighter as she turned to face them. Arina's breath hitched as she pressed her phone to her ear, staring down at the carnage around her. The weight of the hunter's blood on her hands seemed to cloud her mind. The phone rang 3 times before Togi picked up. His voice was low, but instantly concerned. "Arina?" he asked. "What's going on?" For a moment, Arina was frozen, standing amidst the broken bodies. Her heart hammered in her chest. Alcohol coursing through her made sure her mind only felt clear. Her voice cracked before she could regain her composure. "I need your help," she managed, each word dragging itself out. "Hunters. They attacked me." She cursed under her breath. Shit, she didn't even know what she was saying. Feelings were dominating her mind, her posture, her words. "Are you hurt? Arina, are you okay?" Togi's voice was urgent now, his earlier calm replaced by raw worry. "I'm fine," she lied through gritted teeth, shaking off the dizziness threatening to overtake her. "But her words stumbled out as she struggled to steady herself, hearing her own breath too loud in her ears. This time she couldn't hold it together. "They attacked me, Togi. I dealt with it, but I need someone." The silence on the other end was tense, and Arina could almost feel the weight of his hesitation. She closed her eyes, leaning against the cool brick of the alley, the world spinning around her. She didn't want to admit it, didn't want to ask for help, but she couldn't keep pretending. Not for tonight. Togi didn't ask more questions. Instead, his voice softened, yet it carried an edge of command. "Stay right where you are. I'm coming. And don't move," he told. "Where are you?" Arina sighed in relief, even though she hated to be so vulnerable. "I won't move," she muttered. "Just, hurry." The call ended abruptly, and the silence that followed was suffocating. After sharing her location, she looked down at her hands, the blood still slick against her skin, her breath coming in shallow bursts. Her phone buzzed again. Togi's text. I'm bringing the squad. Arina felt a sharp sting of annoyance. She didn't want anyone involved, but the reality of her situation was inescapable. Arina didn't turn to look when she heard footsteps approaching from behind. Togi was no fool. His eyes flicked over her, taking in the blood dripping from her arm, the signs of battle all around the alley. His eyes darkened. What happened? Arina didn't immediately answer. Her jaw tightened as she glanced at the bodies, as if they were some grotesque proof of what she'd just endured. They attacked me, she said flatly. I defended myself. Defended yourself? Kane's voice broke in. He was standing behind Togi, towering like an imposing figure, his arms crossed, looking down at her like she was something to be dissected. You call this defending yourself? 5 hunters dead and you don't even bat an eye? Shut up, Kane, Corvin added, stepping forward and tossing a quick glance at the bodies, but his expression was more curious than critical. She did what she had to do. Togi stood still for a moment, his gaze lingering on Arina as she slumped against the wall, staring at the blood on her hands with a blank expression. He watched as she finally steadied herself, her breaths shallow and uneven, the alcohol still clinging to her senses like a haze. Her emotions were raw, and though Togi expected she'd been through hell before, seeing her like this was different. His stomach churned with a mix of concern and something else, something deeper. He had seen Arina be fierce, ruthless even, but not like this. Togi knew that vampires, especially the older ones, could handle their liquor better than humans, but either way alcohol does its damage. And from the way she was swaying slightly, her words slurring just enough to show vulnerability, it was clear she wasn't thinking straight. Drunk vampires are always like this, he thought. Too much raw emotion, not enough control. That's not what I'm asking. Togi's voice dropped to something lower, more urgent. You're bleeding. She winced, stepping back. Stop looking at me like I'm a damn child. I called you because I don't know what to do with these bodies. Togi clenched his jaw, but he didn't respond immediately. His gaze softened as he took in the toll the fight had clearly taken on her. She was trying to stand strong, but her body was betraying her. There was no strength in her posture, only a quiet exhaustion. Arina. Togi's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of someone who wasn't used to being ignored. He pulled out a blood bag from his jacket, holding it out toward her. Here, drink this. She looked at it, but the disgust in her expression was unmistakable. I'm fine, she said, her voice tight. I don't need it, I've had enough liquid for tonight. Togi exhaled sharply, frustration creeping into his voice. You're not fine, he said firmly. You need to heal, and you're not going to get anywhere bleeding like this. She shook her head, her hand weakly pushing away the blood bag. I told you, I don't want it, she muttered, her voice fragile with emotion. I just want to go home. I don't need anyone, especially not your pity. Stop, Togi snapped, his voice sharp. This isn't about pity. It's about you surviving the night. You're not going anywhere unless you drink this. Arina's eyes flicked to his, the defiance still there, but behind it, there was something close to desperation. Togi saw her shoulders sag, the weight of her exhaustion settling in. Arina, he said softly, stepping closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Please, I'm not asking for your trust. I'm asking for you to take care of yourself, for once. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, she seemed to have given in, just enough. With a deep sigh, she finally took the blood bag from his hand, her fingers trembling slightly as she tore the top open. She drank from it slowly, the motion almost reluctant, but Togi could see the immediate effect. Her pallor improved, the jagged edge of her emotion starting to fade away, even if just a little. That's better, he murmured, watching her carefully. Where are the others? She asked suddenly, noticing the gap in their numbers. They're securing the area, Togi said quietly, his voice surprisingly even. We had to be discreet. He gave her a pointed look. I think, you understand how it is. Discreet? Arina muttered, her eyes narrowing. Togi sighed deeply, his brow furrowing. I didn't want to risk all of them being seen. She turned away from him. You came here because you knew I'd be trouble. Togi's voice softened, the weight of his words sinking into her skin. I came because I care. Of course you do. She felt her breath catch in her throat. She hated the way it sounded when she said it. So hollow, so empty. Togi stepped closer, but he kept his distance. You're not alone, Arina. Her chest tightened painfully. After the last of the bodies had been cleared and the scene was as tidy as it could be, Togi turned his attention back to Arina. She was still leaning against the brick wall, her posture stiff, but she seemed slightly better now that she had fed. The blood bag had helped, but it was clear she was still processing everything. The look in her eyes was haunted, distant, like she was lost in some private war. We're going to walk you home, Togi said, the decision made with no room for argument. It's not safe for you to be out here alone tonight. Arina turned her head sharply. I'm fine, Togi. Really, you don't need to babysit me. Her words were tinged with bitterness. Stop being stubborn. His voice was calm but firm, the kind of voice he used when he was done with any back and forth. You're still on edge. You can barely keep yourself upright. You'll be safer with us. Corvin and Kane exchanged looks, but neither of them argued. They were waiting for Arina to break, to let them in, but they knew this wasn't the moment to push too hard. I don't want to be a burden, she said after a long pause, her voice quieter now. I don't want you guys involved in my mess. Her eyes shifted away, looking anywhere but at Togi. I can handle it. Togi stepped closer, his tone softer but no less insistent. You're not a burden. Let us help, please. There was a long, uncomfortable silence as she stood there, her jaw clenched. She was thinking, Togi could see that much. And after a beat, she finally let out a heavy breath. Fine, she said, though it was barely above a whisper. But I'm not letting you inside. I don't want anyone in my home. Her words were defensive, as if she was guarding herself from something Togi couldn't quite understand. Togi nodded. Deal, but we're walking you back, no arguments. The walk was quiet, but tension hung in the air, thick and palpable. Togi kept his gaze forward, though every now and then, he would glance at Arina out of the corner of his eye. She was walking beside him, shoulders drawn in, as if trying to make herself as small as possible. Her movements were stiff, and the way she avoided making eye contact spoke volumes. As they neared her home, Togi's concern deepened. He noticed how she looked up at the darkened windows of the one-story house, then quickly averted her gaze, her lips pressed tight. Are you sure it's safe for you to be alone here? He asked, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of concern. You've been through too much tonight. We can stay with you until... No, Arina cut him off quickly, but there was a hesitation in her voice. It's fine, I'll be fine. But the way she spoke the words made him doubt it. She reached her door, her hand hovering over the knob for a second longer than necessary. When she turned the key and the door creaked open, she looked back at him, her gaze flickering with uncertainty. I'm fine, really. You don't have to stay. Togi watched her, his concern unshaken. I'm just making sure you're okay. If you ever need us, you know where to find us. She nodded, though there was something in her expression, something she wasn't saying. She hesitated again, then quickly averted her gaze. The moment stretched between them, and then, finally, Arina spoke again. I don't know why I'm acting like this, she muttered, more to herself than to him. Togi smiled, though there was no humor in it. It's the alcohol, Arina. He stepped closer, his voice low and calm. Don't feel ashamed of it. We've all been there. Don't let it make you feel like you've lost control. She met his eyes then, a look of doubt and confusion mixing in her gaze. You don't think less of me? No, Togi said firmly, shaking his head. If anything, I think more of you. For everything you've survived. You're not weak, Arina. Not now, not ever. Arina's lips trembled as if she wanted to say something, but she bit them back. She didn't respond right away, instead staring at him as if she were still trying to process his words. Take care of yourself, Togi added finally. He turned to leave but paused before stepping away. Call me if you need anything, okay? And trust me, I mean it. Arina nodded once, still not quite meeting his eyes. Thanks. For everything, Togi. He lingered for just a second, his gaze softening. "We'll be watching over you. I promise." With that, he turned and began walking back to the others, but a part of him couldn't help but look over his shoulder one last time. Arina stood there, her back to him, looking like she was carrying all the weight of the world only on her own shoulders.